whatever the rest of the day ends up like. Let me just start. Gather my breath. And I'm reading this, and I hope I can read my typing. Usually when I do a talk, if I type it up, I need to type really large, and I didn't. So I'm going to go. Every year we, at the mission, hold what is designated as an anniversary service. We do so to commemorate and give recognition to the early days of the organisation and to those who brought it into being. I'm aware for many people, talks about the past and history of some organisation or place are thought to be boring and irrelevant to their lives in the world today. I'd argue, however, that for both people and organisations, it is their history, what happened to them, and when and why, that fundamentally goes to form who they are and how they operate. That's certainly the case with this organisation, which has a long and rich history. How long exactly, it now seems, is yet to be discovered. It certainly was incorporated as a not-for-profit spiritualist organisation in 1968 with the merger of two earlier spiritualist organisations, the New Age Mission and the Greater World Christian Spiritualist Mission. Today I'm going to focus on the background to the New Age Mission and start with describing something rather dramatic that occurred in Adelaide in 1917. On June 22 of that year, 21 people appeared before the Adelaide Police Court, having all been arrested and charged with pretending to tell fortunes. It was further contended that they had been trading upon the war sorrows and anxieties of those who had loved ones fighting in the war, and by pretending to possess occult powers. The court was crowded that day in anticipation of the unusual proceedings. In addition to the many defendants, there was an imposing array of legal talent at the table reserved for counsels there to represent the accused, while no less than 13 justices, 4 of whom were women, had turned up and could not find room on the bench. And it was only after quite a significant amount of adjudication that it was decided only one of the justices would in fact undertake to take all the cases. Amongst those before the court, Fanny Vesey Fitzsimmons, Ellen Barr and Catherine Smith, but known as Mrs. Loftus, insisted on pleading not guilty. The case against Fanny Fitzsimmons was the first to be heard and was treated as a test case for all those that would follow. It was alleged that she had unlawfully used certain subtle craft, means or device, to wit, palmistry and clairvoyance, to deceive and impose upon a woman called Maud Wiltshire. The court examined the history of the law, and in particular Clause 67 of the South Australia Police Act, which provided that any person should be deemed a rogue and a vagabond who committed such an offence, and they would be liable for imprisonment for up to 3 months. Fanny Fitzsimmons' lawyer argued that she hadn't attempted to deceive Maud Wiltshire, who was actually a policewoman and who was not in fact imposed upon in any way. But the court just arbitrarily dismissed that defence argument, and Fitzsimmons was convicted and fined. Based on the decision against Fanny, Mrs. Loftus felt obliged to change her plea from not guilty to guilty, although she didn't believe she had in fact done anything wrong. Mrs. Barr hung in there and stepped up in front of the magistrate's dais and in a passionate and determined voice told the court, and I quote her words, "I am guilty of being a clairvoyant." Not to impose it. A clairvoyant does not impose on people. I'm not a fraud. And in attacking clairvoyance, you are attacking my religion. I am a spiritualist. And in attacking clairvoyance, you are attacking spiritualism. I have the right to follow my religion, and I am an honest being. Sadly, the magistrate was not moved by her words. And they found her guilty, and he was fined, of course, as were all the others. And more of them in 1917 were charged and found guilty. The decision of the court made quite clear. At that time, at the whim of the police, spiritualist mediums here in Adelaide were at risk of being arrested and found guilty of being rogues and vagabonds for allegedly fortune-telling. Despite this, I'll stay with Mrs. Loftus, who was in fact also a spiritualist, and she continued to hold development classes, Sunday meetings, and offer private readings in her home. On legal advice, however, she introduced a disclaimer notice which she insisted all who came to her for a reading read and signed. But in July 1921, just 3.5 years later, Mrs. Loftus was again arrested and charged with unlawfully pretending to tell fortunes. Once again, the arrest arose out of what can only call a police sting. An undercover policewoman went to Mrs. Loftus's home and read her disclaimer and signed it, received a reading, and then the police came in and arrested Mrs. Loftus. She was again found guilty in the police court. This time, however, she appealed against the decision. In what was described as an important judgment, the Chief Justice rejected her appeal, stating that it didn't matter that she had no intent to deceive, there could be no fortune-telling, telling of fortunes. None could foresee the future or the past, and none could receive information from the dead. It was, the Chief Justice declared, behaviour that was not only harmful but inherently evil. So there we were, the spiritualists, apparently inherently evil. I'm taking the time to tell you this because two important reasons. First, it might be important that you understand this was the situation in which spiritualists in South Australia had to operate for many, many years. And how brave they actually were. Between 1918 and 1948, there was a recurring campaign by the police to hunt out spiritualists and charge them as fortune tellers. 23 spiritualists were arrested and found guilty of pretending to tell fortune over those years. 10 of the 23 spiritualists prosecuted were either committee members of or regular speakers and demonstrators at spiritualist churches in Adelaide. A further 6 found guilty, including 2 who were charged twice on separate occasions over a number of years apart, were at the time of their convictions actual leaders of spiritualist churches. 2 of those church leaders were charged on the basis of events that took place when women police officers dressed in plain clothes, I'm looking at you all today, attended one of their church's regular church meetings, held in halls, clearly identified as the place where spiritualist congregants pursued their religious beliefs. They came in, they watched them do their Sunday meetings, their Wednesday night groups, and then they charged them with fortune telling. It took much campaigning in the 1950s to get the law changed. And members of our organisation at that time were in the forefront of that fight. There is a second reason for telling you all this, and that's to give for the first time recognition to the woman known as Mrs. Loftus, who I have discovered from my recent research actually has a place in the history of this organisation. Despite her second conviction, the then 60-year-old Mrs. Loftus still did not give up. And by 1922, she was again running Sunday services, this time in the Oakley Hall in Wakefield Street, under the name of the Order of Truth, but also holding weekly development classes at 344 Carrington Street in the city. As it happens, the Vice President of the Order of Truth and Chairman of the Sunday meetings was a man by the name of Norman Davies. And his wife, Hilda, was also involved. While we don't know yet what drew Norman and Hilda to become interested in spiritualism, it's clear that from 1920, when they settled in Adelaide after the war, they began attending Mrs. Loftus's meetings and development classes. It would appear that it was at those classes that Hilda Davies, later known as Sister Hilda, first began to develop her mediumistic abilities, while Norman learned about giving talks at the Sunday services. Unfortunately, Mrs. Loftus's meetings came to an abrupt end in May 1923 when she became ill, and she died less than a year later at the age of 63. Norman and Hilda Davies did not, however, give up their commitment to spiritualism. And when they moved in 1924 to a property at Yatla, a suburb near Port Adelaide now called Rosewater, they continued holding home circles, while Norman converted a barn on the property so that they might begin holding public meetings and other activities. In August 1925, their efforts had reached the stage where they found it necessary to open a bank account for the monies they were collecting. Had to give it a name. So they called it the New Age Mission. And that's how it, at that point, apparently came into being. And the New Age Mission began advertising its activities and ran various weekly events, socials, dances, healing classes, development classes, divine services on a Sunday throughout the 1920s and 1930s. Both Hilda and Norman gave talks and demonstrations of mediumship at the other Adelaide Spiritualist churches, knowing, but gravely ignoring, the risks that they too took every time they did so. In addition, Norman and Hilda did a lot to raise funds for returning soldiers, the homeless, orphaned and disabled children, and we became members of the local Labour Party and campaigned for that as well. In 1940, when in their 50s, Norman and Hilda moved to Ailsa Street in Fullerton. But this time Norman ceased being involved in the mission's activities, but Hilda continued, and over the following years ran Sunday meetings out of various city addresses, including 17 Weymouth Street, and for quite a few years the Curzon Theatrette in Waller Place. And her weekly classes were held at 74 Franklin Street in the city. And she did that until she died in 1956. Hilda's friend Gertrude Lanier took on the leadership of the mission at that time and led it, and later the organisation formed by the merger with the Greater World Christian Spiritualist Church. It is only by this recent research that we've discovered the role that Norman Davies actually played in the early days. In the past, most was known about Hilda, a woman much loved for her kindness and loving nature, as well as her mediumship ability. She was a big trance medium, who would, from the platform whilst in trance, give messages from the spirit world to people in the congregation. It's also by this research that we've discovered that Mrs. Loftus, a much martyred woman with a tremendous tenacity to keep going, and stayed true to her spiritualist beliefs, despite adversity and hardship. I guess it's good to know that Hilda and Norman at least lived to see the laws change in 1953 to finally provide some protection for spiritualists. There is a law still in place that could still affect us. Even today, it hasn't been revoked. It has just been modified, and so spiritualists still, and their right to religion, continues to be under some cloud in legal terms. But it's true to say it's because of people like Mrs. Loftus and Norman and Hilda Davies that we have the freedom we do have today to come together in meetings like this. It's important, I believe, that we acknowledge their commitment and dedication and give thanks to them, for without their efforts and that of those who follow, we would not have the building we are in today. Equally, because of this research, it's become clear that it's unclear when, in fact, the mission really started. Some of the old records suggest it was 1921. Others suggest it was at 1922. Others still 1924. And the back book only appears in 1925. Clearly, the old mention of 1921-22 must relate to their time with Mrs. Loftus. 1925, we know, out in the athe, they were holding meetings every single day. So today, we're celebrating the anniversary, which might be the 95th, the 96th, 97th, 98th, or 1999. I hope, as I continue my research, we'll be able to find out really exactly when to pin it down. Because we are very close to it, whether it's 95, 98 or 99. It has also, really you could say, been continuously operating for almost 100 years. And that's pretty good, don't you think? Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. That's great.
Sorry, it did take longer.
The one thing Liz didn't say, that we now know also Norman Davis was in the army in the First World War, and he met Sister Hilda after being wounded on numerous occasions, and Sister Hilda was his nurse. And Norman Davis was a man of colour.
A man of colour.
Or in other words, his father came from, we can't tell where, but more likely Louisiana or the French West Indies.
Yes.
So quite fascinating. And of course he was a boxer. So the one activity Liz didn't mention was Friday night boxing in the same hall as they had the Sunday meeting.
He also boxed elsewhere, down here at Unley, at about now. We do actually have a picture of Hilda and Norman's wedding, because I made contact with a relative of Hilda's brother. They had wedding photos, so we now have an image of Norman as well, which is really good. But also we have an image of him as a boxer, which is quite fascinating from the newspapers.
He also led probably one of the most famously unsuccessful footy teams that ever played Australian rules in the Church League. I don't think over 10 seasons they won a game. They probably managed about over 10 seasons about 1,000 points.
They were stayers, weren't they?
So thank you, Liz. And I know just this research is taking up most of the time. It's about the whole history of how spiritualism had to fight tremendous battles to even become established in South Australia. The city of religious freedom was not the city of religious freedom for spiritualism by a long way. Okay, we now have the meditation. I hope you managed to hear that. Did you hear that online? No.
Why don't you check before?
Did you hear all that?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, yes, that was good.
I tried to turn the volume up so you would hear it. So, okay, it's quite tricky, this stuff. We'll start the meditation. So just settle yourself down.